The day I told my parents I was gay, they said I was dead to them. That sentence doesn't echo. It doesn't bounce off walls or ring in your ears. It just stays. Like a weight on your chest that never leaves. Like a shadow that follows you, even when the sun's out. That was the day everything shifted. But to really understand how I got there, how I ended up hearing those words from the people who raised me, you have to go back. I grew up in a house where Sunday wasn't optional. We wore our best clothes, sat in the same pew, smiled at the same families every week like we were the picture of goodness. My father was one of the church deacons. My mother led the women's ministry. And I? I was the obedient, straight-A kid everyone pointed to with pride. But even as a child, I knew. I knew I was different. I didn't have the language for it. I didn't know what it meant. But I knew the way my stomach twisted when the boys in youth group bragged about girls. I knew the way I caught myself staring too long at the quiet, gentle ones, not because I wanted to be them, but because I wanted to be near them. And I knew, deep down, that if I ever let that truth out, I'd lose everything. So I buried it. My parents were never cruel. Not in the textbook sense. They weren't the shouting type. They didn't hit. But the silence? The pressure? The unspoken expectations? That was violence too. You could feel it during dinner when someone on TV said the word gay. The way Dad would suck his teeth and mutter, disgusting. The way Mom would change the channel like something dirty had invaded her home. I learned very young how to laugh at the right jokes. How to say, no homo, when I complimented a friend. How to play along. I had to. They were grooming me, for their version of success. Church leader. Married by 25. Children by 30. A business, a house, a heterosexual life wrapped in a bow. They never asked me what I wanted. Because they assumed they already knew. The only person I could be real with was my little brother, Micah. He was 5 years younger, always curious, always listening. When I was 15 and he was 10, he found me crying in the garage after youth group. "Why are you sad?" he asked. I told him I wasn't. He didn't believe me. So I whispered to him the truth. Not everything. Just enough. I think I like boys. He blinked. Thought for a moment. Then said, "Okay. Can we still go get ice cream?" Micah never judged me. Never pulled away. Even when he didn't understand, he stayed close. I think he saw the weight I carried before anyone else did. But Micah couldn't protect me. Not from them. Not forever. The actual coming out wasn't planned. I was 19. Home from college for the summer. I'd been seeing someone, just quietly. A guy named Julian. Sweet. Gentle. He worked at a bookstore and liked poetry more than sports. One night, Mom saw a text on my phone. Nothing explicit. Just a photo of us at the park. Arms around each other. Smiling. When she handed me the phone, her face was unreadable. "What is this?" My heart stopped. The house was quiet. Dad was in the next room. I swallowed. "He's my boyfriend." She stared at me like I'd spoken in tongues. Then she said, "No. He's not." That night, they both sat me down. It wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict. My father spoke in scripture. My mother cried like someone had died. And when I tried to explain, to say that I was still me, still theirs, still worthy, my father said, "You are dead to us now." Just like that. They packed a bag. Left it by the front door. No yelling. No dramatic scene. They told me to leave. That I wasn't welcome. That they wouldn't support my lifestyle. That they had to protect Micah from that influence. And so I walked. At 10:41 p.m., with nothing but a backpack, $62, and a heart that felt like it had been pulled from my chest and stomped on. They didn't even lock the door behind me. You think the worst part is that moment. The exile. The rejection. But it's not. The worst part is what comes after. The silence. No one called. Not my cousins. Not the pastor. Not the friends I grew up with. No one wanted to take a side, so they all chose safety. Which meant they chose them. I tried staying with a classmate for a while. Slept on the floor. Took a part-time job cleaning tables at a diner. I showered at the gym. Ate crackers for dinner. Wore the same jeans until they smelled like despair. Every now and then, I'd get a glimpse of their lives through social media. Church picnics. Micah's birthday. Family Christmas photos. My absence was never mentioned. I wasn't missing. I was erased. I remember one night in particular. It was raining. Cold. I hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. My boots were soaked through. And I sat outside the back of a store under an awning, curled up with my arms over my knees like a child. And I thought, maybe they were right. Maybe I was dead. Maybe I didn't belong anywhere. There wasn't a suicide note or a plan. Just this quiet ache. This surrender. But then I remembered Micah. The way he smiled. The way he listened. And I thought, if I disappear, he'll never know the truth. He'll only have their version of me. And I couldn't let that happen. So I made a choice. Right there in the rain, surrounded by trash and loneliness, I whispered to myself. If I stay here, I die. If I leave, maybe I live. And I stood up. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. But I knew I couldn't stay in the shame they'd wrapped around me like a burial cloth. I had to find something else. Anything else. That night, I found a flyer for a youth shelter across town. They had a bed. A warm meal. A shower. The man at the desk didn't flinch when I said I was gay. He just handed me a towel and said, "Get some rest." It was the first time in weeks anyone had looked at me without judgment. That night, I cried myself to sleep, not from pain, but from relief. Because for the first time since I came out, I felt human again. I stayed there for 3 weeks. They helped me find temporary housing. Gave me leads on jobs. Connected me to a community center where I met others who had been thrown out for who they were. I wasn't alone. And somehow, that made everything bearable. The fear. The hunger. The shame. They didn't vanish. But they stopped defining me. People think survival is about food and shelter. But for people like me, survival starts with being seen. Truly seen. Not as a project. Not as a problem. But as a person with a name, a voice, a dream. I didn't have money. I didn't have family. I didn't even have a home address. But I had my name. And I was about to give that name new meaning. I left with nothing but my name. But I was about to give that name new meaning. I didn't know where I was headed. I just knew I had to move. The city I grew up in, my hometown, it was haunted. Every street corner held a memory of who I was expected to be. Every alley whispered the echo of their voices, "You'll never make it." So, I left. 3 buses, an empty wallet, and a borrowed duffel bag later, I found myself in a place that didn't know me. No church connections. No family. No one to look at me and say, "Aren't you that kid?" I could finally be anonymous. But anonymity is a double-edged sword. Invisibility is freedom. Invisibility is also loneliness. The city was louder. Faster. Colder in a way that wasn't just about the weather. I found a cheap room in a halfway house. It smelled like mildew and old cigarettes. My bed had springs that poked me in the back. I shared a bathroom with 6 strangers. But no one cared who I loved. And in a twisted way, that made it feel like a palace. I needed work. Any work. That's how I became a barista. No experience. Just a willingness to learn and a desperation not to go hungry again. They handed me an apron and said, "Smile like you mean it." So I did. Even when my feet ached. Even when a customer told me I had a feminine voice and snickered. Even when the tips were just loose change. I smiled. Because behind the counter, I was safe. Behind the counter, I wasn't a disappointment. I was just another tired kid trying to survive. I didn't tell anyone I was gay. Not at first. Old habits die hard. I'd learned too well that honesty could be a loaded weapon, especially when handed to the wrong hands. So I let them assume. Let them misgender my partner when I said, "I used to date someone." Let them make jokes about those people while I nodded politely and focused on foaming the milk just right. Cowardice? Maybe. But it's hard to be brave when you're still picking pieces of yourself off the floor. I lived in survival mode for months. Woke up. Worked. Ate whatever was cheap. Slept too little. Cried too much. I watched others laugh freely. Saw couples kiss at bus stops. Listened to customers complain about parents who still paid their rent. And I envied them. Not for their money. But for their safety. I envied the peace they walked in, like they didn't have to fight for air. Then one day, something shifted. His name was Elijah. Tall, tired eyes, skin the color of burned sugar, and a voice like jazz in the rain. He came in every Tuesday morning. Always ordered the same thing, black coffee, no sugar. Always tipped $5. Always said, "You've got sharp hands. Ever do anything creative?" At first, I shrugged him off. But he kept coming. Kept tipping. Kept noticing. One morning, after a particularly brutal double shift, I said, "What do you mean by creative?" He smiled. "You move like someone who used to make things." I blinked. Used to. He sat at the bar and asked me what I wanted to do with my life. No one had asked me that in years. I said the first thing that came to mind, I want to build something. Something that lasts. He nodded. Then you need more than espresso and survival. You need a blueprint. Elijah became something like a mentor. Not in the cliché, hand you the world way. He didn't have much. He worked at a community tech center. Taught kids how to code. Helped single moms start Etsy stores. Ran a local startup boot camp on weekends. But he saw people. And he saw me. He gave me books. Podcasts. Links to free courses online. He invited me to shadow him at one of his workshops. And for the first time, I wasn't just working. I was learning. I threw myself into everything. Digital marketing. Basic web design. Branding. Content strategy. It was messy at first. I tried to start a blog. Failed. Tried to sell thrifted items online. Failed. Tried freelancing on Fiverr. Failed. Tried flipping phones. Failed. I failed so much it stopped stinging. Until one day, something stuck. A small business needed a logo redesign. Elijah recommended me. I charged $40. They loved it. Paid me $60. It wasn't about the money. It was the first time I felt valued for my mind. I started freelancing at night, after work. I worked from the library. From coffee shops. From borrowed Wi-Fi outside closed buildings. There were days I was too tired to think. There were nights I fell asleep on my keyboard. But I kept going. Because every time I wanted to quit, I heard their voices. You'll never make it. You're a disgrace. You're dead to us. Those words didn't hurt anymore. They fueled me. One night, after landing my 5th client in 2 weeks, I sat in my tiny room with tears in my eyes and wrote a note. It wasn't long. Just 3 lines. I taped it to the inside of my closet door. You are not their disappointment. You are your own beginning. Keep going. I kept the barista job. Kept saving every cent I could. By month 8, I'd made $4,300 in side income. By month 12, I moved out of the halfway house into a shared apartment. It wasn't luxury. But it was mine. I bought a plant. A real one. Named him Malcolm. I told myself that if Malcolm survived, so would I. Sometimes I still dreamed of home. Of Micah. Of family dinners before everything broke. And in those dreams, I always heard my father's voice. You'll never make it without us. And I would wake up with clenched fists and a heart on fire. Because I was making it. And they weren't even watching. I started documenting my journey anonymously online. No names. No photos. Just truths. Homeless to freelancer. Disowned but determined. Building an empire 1 pixel at a time. People started following. Messaging. Sharing their stories. A girl in Texas said, "Your words kept me from giving up." A boy in Nigeria said, "They kicked me out too. I'm still standing." I realized something then. What I was building. It wasn't just for me. It was for us. All the kids who were told they were wrong. Unlovable. Disposable. Elijah noticed. You're not just hustling anymore, he said. You're planting. I didn't understand at first. Then he explained. Anyone can sell. But when you create something that gives others hope, you're building roots. That's how empires begin. I didn't have investors. I didn't have parents cheering me on. I didn't even have a decent chair. I worked from the floor most nights. But I had hunger. I had purpose. And I had rage, the kind that simmers beneath the surface, not loud, not explosive, just steady enough to keep the engine running. Eventually, I quit the barista job. Scary as hell. But I was ready. I created my first online brand, helped small creators grow. Focused on authenticity, storytelling, and grit. Clients came slowly, then all at once. I tripled my rates. Still booked. I hired someone part-time, another queer kid from a shelter. We worked side by side, fueled by coffee, stubbornness, and belief. I made $10,000 in 1 month. I looked at the number and laughed. Then I cried. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I Googled my parents. Their church had a new website. Their ministry had grown. Photos of smiling couples. Events. Testimonials. I wasn't mentioned. Not even once. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was calm. Because I no longer needed their permission to succeed. I closed the laptop. Stared out the window at the city I now called mine. And I whispered to myself. And just when I thought I had nothing left to lose, something started to work. And just when I thought I had nothing left to lose, something started to work. That something was small at first. A client recommended another. Then two more. Then someone tagged my story in a thread about resilience, and overnight, I had 100 emails in my inbox. No funding. No safety net. Just grit, a Wi-Fi connection, and a will that refused to die. I remember the exact moment it shifted. It was a Friday night. Rain tapping on the windows. I was barefoot, sitting on the floor of my new apartment. Yes, my apartment. Not a shelter. Not a borrowed couch. Mine. The keys were still in my pocket. I held them up, stared at the tiny silver shape resting in my palm, and whispered, I did this. And I wept. Not from sadness, but from something purer, a release. Because for the first time in years, I had a door that closed behind me. A bed that was mine. A life that wasn't borrowed. The wins started stacking up. I hit my first $10,000 month. Launched my first digital product, a branding kit for small creators. It sold out in a day. I reinvested. Learned more. Partnered with someone I'd met through Elijah's bootcamp. Together, we launched a minimalist online store focused on identity-affirming merchandise. Shirts that read, "Your hate doesn't pay my bills." Journals that said, "Rewrite your name in your own handwriting." It wasn't just commerce. It was declaration. And people responded. With growth came something I never expected, community. Not the kind I was raised in. Not the kind that required silence or straightness or Sunday school performance. This was different. I met Leah, a trans artist who painted fire into canvases and made joy look defiant. Jules, a drag performer who knew every lyric from the 90s and made me laugh so hard my stomach hurt. Cam, a quiet photographer who saw light in places most people missed. They weren't just friends. They were home. They showed up for me in ways my blood never did. When I launched a new service, they promoted it. When I cried on a random Tuesday, they brought food and sat on the floor until I could breathe again. We called ourselves the Rebuilders. Because we'd all been broken. And we were all still standing. Somewhere in all this noise, love snuck in too. Their name was Riley. Soft voice. Strong heart. Smelled like cedar and mint. We met at a workshop I taught at a local center. They asked real questions. Stayed after to help clean up. Texted me later that night, "You teach like someone who survived something." I told them I had. They said, "Me too." It wasn't fireworks. It was a slow flame. A kind of love I'd never known. Not loud. Not desperate. Just safe. The day we held hands at Pride was the day I knew I'd made it. Not because I was rich. Not because my face was in a magazine. But because we walked down the street, rainbow flags above us, strangers cheering beside us, and I wasn't afraid. I didn't flinch. Didn't shrink. Didn't scan the crowd for disapproval. I held Riley's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. And in that moment, it was. Business kept growing. We expanded into consulting. Helped queer entrepreneurs build brands. Helped nonprofits improve digital storytelling. Partnered with advocacy groups. Then came the feature. A journalist had followed my online content for months. Reached out. Asked for an interview. The headline read, "From Exiled to Empowered, the entrepreneur who rewrote his own name." It went viral. Within 48 hours, my inbox exploded. Messages from teenagers in small towns. Mothers who'd failed their kids but wanted to do better. Even a retired pastor who said, "You made me rethink everything I taught." Then came the invite, a TEDx talk. Topic, the power of being uninvited. I accepted. The stage was terrifying. I stood in front of 500 people and told the story I'd never thought I'd say out loud. The rejection. The hunger. The name they tried to erase. And I ended with this. You can exile a person. You can silence them. But you cannot unwrite their story? When they've learned to hold the pen. The standing ovation didn't hit me as hard as the DM I got the next day. "I'm 16. I came out last week. They kicked me out. But I saw your talk and I know now. I'm not alone." That's when the past came knocking. It started with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey. This is your cousin Jay. Can we talk?" Then another. "Micah wants to see you." And then, "My mother." An email. Simple subject line, "We just didn't know." No apology. No, "I'm sorry for leaving you out in the cold." Just, "We want to talk. We've seen your work. We didn't understand what you were going through back then. Maybe it's time." Maybe it's time? I stared at the message for hours. Not because I didn't know what to say. But because part of me wondered, why now? Was it guilt? Shame? Or just the fact that the world knew my name, and they couldn't bear not being included in the narrative? I asked myself a hard question. Do I want closure? Or do I want peace? Sometimes they're not the same. I agreed to meet. Neutral ground. Coffee shop. 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. They walked in like ghosts, familiar but distant. My mother looked older. Smaller. My father stood behind her like a shadow. Micah wasn't there. They said they were proud. Said they read everything. Said it was never about hate, just confusion. I listened. Calm. Quiet. Then I said the words I'd waited years to say. I built this without you. I survived your silence. I became the man you said could never exist. Not despite you, but because I had no other choice. They looked stunned. Not because of what I said. But because I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging. I wasn't broken. I was whole. They asked if we could start over. I said, I'm not erasing what happened. They didn't like that. But I wasn't there to make them comfortable. I was there to reclaim my voice. To speak for the version of me who sat alone in the rain, shivering, wondering if I'd ever matter again. We parted without hugs. Just a quiet nod. I watched them walk away. And I felt? Nothing. Not rage. Not joy. Just closure. The kind that comes not from forgiveness, but from finally knowing who you are. Later that week, I got a call. Another invite. This time, it wasn't a podcast or press. It was a televised forum on faith, identity, and reconciliation. They wanted me to close the show. To share my story with millions. I stood backstage, mic clipped to my shirt, lights blinding. And all I could think was, they tried to bury me. But they didn't know I was a seed. The camera light turned red. I stepped into it. Heart racing. But voice steady. My name is ____. I'm gay. I'm an entrepreneur. A builder. A survivor. And I'm here because someone once told me I'd never make it. But I did. And if you're watching this, feeling like you're nothing, I want you to know. You don't need their permission to become everything. But the story wasn't over. I still had something to say. And the whole world was going to hear it. They say when the world finally listens to your voice, it doesn't echo, it expands. It started with an email. The subject line was simple, keynote invitation, Unity Summit 20XX. An LGBTQ+ conference. National. Huge. Hundreds of thousands of online viewers. Thousands more in person. They wanted me to speak. Me. The boy who once slept on a rotting mattress in a halfway house. The kid who was told he was a disgrace, a mistake, an abomination. Now they wanted my story to close the summit. To send people home with hope. With truth. I didn't say yes immediately. Because truth, real truth, comes with a cost. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to pay it again. But then I remembered the teenager who messaged me after my TEDx talk. The one who said I kept them alive. And I knew what I had to do. Not for fame. Not for validation. But for everyone who ever had to choose between their identity and their safety. The auditorium was massive. Red curtains. Golden spotlight. The kind of stage I'd only seen in dreams. Or nightmares. Backstage, I could hear the roar of the audience settling. I clutched my notes. Then let them go. This wasn't about memorizing lines. This was about remembering pain. And reclaiming power. The lights dimmed. My name was called. I stepped into the light. My voice, steady but soft, filled the silence. The day I told my parents I was gay, they said I was dead to them. Gasps. Murmurs. Silence again. I continued. I was 19. It was raining. I remember the sound of my father placing my bags outside before he even spoke a word. I remember my mother saying, "This isn't who we raised." I remember the quietest part of all, when no one stopped them. Not my siblings. Not my church. Not my so-called friends. They called me a disgrace. But I became a CEO. They said I'd never make it without them. I made a movement. I didn't do it to prove them wrong. I did it because I refused to believe that my pain was a prophecy. I told them about the nights I slept on benches. About the jobs I took. About Malcolm, the houseplant I named just to prove I could keep something alive. I told them about Elijah. About my first $40 job. About crying over a cheap IKEA keychain that symbolized freedom. Then I looked out into the crowd. Faces. Hundreds of them. And in the front row, a group of teens holding up signs that read, "We are not mistakes. You helped me stay alive. Your story is my story too." I swallowed the lump in my throat. We live in a world that tries to package our pain and sell it back to us as shame. But here's the truth, no one gets to own your narrative but you. You don't have to forgive people who want you silent. You don't have to shrink to survive. And you do not owe anyone an apology for existing. What they called rebellion, I now call rebirth. What they saw as failure, I now call foundation. Pain is not a prophecy. You can rewrite the ending. By now, people were crying. Some standing. Most gripping the hands beside them. I took a breath. To those who never got the apology, never got the hug, never got the "I love you anyway," I see you. I am you. And I promise you, you are not alone. We are the children they tried to erase. We are the fire they tried to drown. We are the future they feared would speak, and we are speaking now. Asterisk, and for anyone out there who's still in the dark, just hold on. The sun is coming. And it rises in you. The crowd erupted. Not applause. Thunder. A standing ovation that shook the stage beneath me. I stood there, not basking, but grounded. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running. I wasn't proving. I wasn't surviving. I was being. I stepped off stage and collapsed into the arms of Elijah, Riley, and my chosen family. We cried together. And then the internet did what the internet does. The speech went viral. Millions of views. Hashtags. Tributes. Duets. Reaction videos. People across the world using my words to tell their own truths. And then came the backlash. Not from strangers. From my parents. They released a statement. Not to apologize. But to defend themselves. We never abandoned our child. We were simply struggling to understand. We are hurt by the way we've been portrayed. Portrayed? This wasn't fiction. It was my life. They went on a Christian radio show. Talked about how hard it is to be a parent in these modern times. Framed themselves as the victims of cancel culture. But the world saw through it. Because truth has a light of its own. And mine was burning too brightly to be ignored. People responded with clarity. You don't get to erase someone's pain just because they survived it. Accountability isn't cruelty. It's the beginning of change. He didn't name you. You named yourselves when you threw him away. I didn't clap back. Didn't go on another podcast. Didn't post a thread. Because I didn't need revenge. I had something stronger. Peace. And proof. I had built an empire not on anger, but on truth. And it was changing lives. I received messages from lawmakers. From educators. From kids in shelters who were using my speech to inspire their peers. One teacher in Alabama played it for her 8th grade class. One of her students came out the next day. Alive. Whole. Unapologetic. As I sit here now, writing this, I look around at the life I never thought I'd have. Photos on the walls. Business awards. Letters from strangers who call me brother and guide and survivor. And one thing sits in the center of it all. A photo. Me, age 19, standing in the rain. Homeless. Hurt. But holding a notebook. Inside it, a single sentence. They don't get the final word. They didn't. And neither does anyone else who tries to write you out of your own life. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And the truth? It echoes longer than silence ever will. I didn't need revenge. I had something stronger, peace. And proof. They cut me off because I told the truth about who I was. So I built a life so big, they had to watch me from the outside. And honestly? That's the best seat they ever gave me. Flash forward, years later. Time doesn't just heal. It teaches. It's been years since that speech. Since the world cracked open and let my story echo. Since strangers called me brave and my parents called me a liar. And now? Now I run an empire. An honest one. Built not on shame, but on soul. On grit. On queer joy. My company has over 100 employees. We create programs for LGBTQ+ youth. We fund scholarships for kids kicked out like I was. We partner with schools, cities, shelters. I sit at tables they once said I'd never be invited to. I speak in rooms that used to mock people like me. And when I enter with purpose. Because I didn't climb out of that gutter just to live quietly. I rose to lift others. There's a wall in my office. A long stretch of photos. One is a newspaper clipping from the day I launched my first nonprofit. Another is my first apartment key, mounted in gold. One is a photo of Elijah hugging me backstage after the speech. But my favorite one? A Polaroid from the shelter, me holding a cup of instant noodles and grinning like I just won the lottery. Because back then, surviving was the win. My message to the viewers. Now I want to talk to you. Whoever you are, wherever you are. If your family cut you off, that's not your fault. It's theirs. Let me say that again. It is theirs. Your truth was not the problem. Their fear was. Your identity is not a rebellion. It is a revelation. You are not broken. You are worthy. Worthy of love. Worthy of respect. Worthy of safety. Worthy of celebration. Worthy of safety. Worthy of celebration. And no matter how bad it feels right now, how lonely, how cruel, how unfair, I promise you this. It does not stay this way. You don't need their approval. You need your own permission to grow. You don't need their blessing. You need your own belief. You don't need to go back to win. Sometimes, your greatest victory is never returning. Sometimes I still think about them. My parents. I wonder if they ever regret it. If they ever sit in their quiet house, scrolling through headlines, watching interviews, pretending they don't recognize the name. They used to say I'd be nothing without them. But the truth? I became everything because I finally let go of needing them. I let go of begging. Of shrinking. Of explaining. I let go of the lie that I had to earn love that should have been mine from the start. And I built a life so full of it, it spills. Into strangers. Into friends. Into people I may never meet but who will carry this fire forward. They cut me off because I told the truth about who I was. So I built a life so big, they had to watch me from the outside. And honestly? That's the best seat they ever gave me. If you've ever been rejected for just being yourself. If you've ever had to shrink to fit in. If you've ever been told that who you are is too much, too wrong, or too hard to love. Then this space is for you. Drop a love icon in the comments if you've ever felt invisible. Drop a red heart if you had to start over. Drop a red heart if you survived what was meant to break you. Let the world know. We are not invisible anymore. We are seen. We are loud. We are loving. We are still here. And if someone's reading the comments right now feeling scared, feeling alone, wondering if they'll ever make it through, let them see your red heart and realize. They are not alone. Tell us your story. Tell us your turning point. Tell us what gave you strength. Because when you speak, someone else finds their voice. When you share, someone else feels less ashamed. When you love out loud, someone else learns to stop hiding. Comment. Connect. Share this video with someone who needs it tonight. Subscribe to join this movement, because this is more than a channel. It's a home for those who had to build themselves from scratch. And to those who left? To those who said we wouldn't make it? To those who only loved a version of us that never existed? We made it anyway. We loved ourselves harder. We held each other up. We built lives so full, so beautiful, so unapologetic. They have no choice but to watch from the outside. So tonight, light up this comment section with love. Let's make this the loudest quiet revolution YouTube has ever seen. Because your story matters. Your truth matters. And someone out there needs to hear it right now. I'll see you in the comments. I'll see you in the next story. And until then, stay loud. Stay loved. Stay unshaken.